My impression is that the development context of Duskfade is quite interesting, precisely because it seems to have started small, with a clear ambition, and grew without completely losing its identity. From the studio's announcements, you can feel that it is not a project built to look big, but rather a game that has been polished little by little from a very specific vision. What stands out most to me is that the team started with only 2 people and later reached around 14, which significantly changes how you read the project. This usually gives that feeling of an auteur game that gained muscle as the studio secured support, feedback, and structure. At the same time, this growth also makes me attentive because it is the kind of thing that can greatly improve the final quality, but it can also bring scope risk if the vision is not well tied together. Another point that weighs heavily is how the game was presented early on, as a well-acknowledged homage to 3D platformers and PS2 classics, with strong references to Kingdom Hearts, Jak and Daxter, and Ratchet and Clank. This, to me, conveys the feeling of a team that knows exactly which nostalgia it wants to evoke, and is not trying to hide its influences. When a project embraces this with such clarity, I usually see it as a sign of strong artistic direction, not a lack of originality. From what has been released so far, the developer seems to have worked with a well-defined gameplay vision from the start, focusing on movement, combat, and a classic adventure feel. This is good because it gives the impression that the game was not built on top of a passing trend, but on a solid core idea. Still, the demo and released materials alone are not enough for me to say that everything is fully mature. You can see intent, but you cannot ignore that part of the charm comes precisely from the carefully chosen presentation. I also find it relevant that the studio mentioned recent playtesting sessions and an estimated length of 15 to 20 hours, depending on the secrets found. To me, this suggests a development process that has already entered a more concrete polishing phase, rather than just a vague promise. At the same time, this duration range reinforces the idea of a game lean enough to try to deliver quality, rather than inflating content just to look bigger. On the production side, the partnership with Fireshine Games and the expansion to multiple platforms show that the project has left the niche indie stage and entered a more visible level. This is usually positive because it brings publishing structure, reach, and perhaps more security for the team, but it also increases the pressure on the final result. In my reading, Duskfade feels like one of those cases where the game is being treated with artistic care, but now needs to prove that this care also translates into technical consistency. Looking solely at development and what has been shown so far, Duskfade looks promising because it has a small origin, a very conscious identity, and growth that feels organic. I would still keep a foot back with any project that comes loaded with so many references and visual expectations, but right now, the development context gives me more confidence than distrust. To me, it's the kind of game that feels made by people who genuinely want to reclaim a specific era of the genre, rather than just copy its aesthetic. The premise sounds simple on paper. A boy named Zirian needs to save his older sister, Aliera, who got trapped in the Clockmaker's Tower after the world plunged into an eternal night. But when you understand what lies behind it, the thing gains a weight I do not frequently see in platformers of this style. What truly caught my attention was discovering that the story was born from a personal experience of Ricardo Chorques Mesa regarding dealing with real loss. This completely changes how I look at the premise. It is not just rescuing the sister from a magical tower, it is a metaphor about grief, about how each person processes pain differently, and this becomes quite explicit when you see that Aliera locked herself in her room, working obsessively after the death of their grandfather. Playing the demo, you can feel this emotional weight right from the opening. The initial cutscene is not just a generic action game introduction, it already plants the seed of something sadder. A brother trying to reach a sister who is isolating herself from everyone because of pain. To me, this is an intelligent way to make you care about the character even before the first platforming stage begins. One thing I really liked is how the game turns enemies and challenges into representations of emotional obstacles. According to the released material, every villain and every difficulty Zirian faces symbolizes an internal barrier he needs to overcome, not just another boss in the way. This fits very well with the idea that the game is about growing up and facing the unknown, something that is clear both in the demo and in the official descriptions. The mechanical cuckoo, also seems to have a bigger role than just being a gameplay gadget. It is literally a creation of the sister, so carrying this companion on the journey is like carrying a piece of herself as Zirian moves forward. I do not know if this will be explored further in the full game, but in the demo, you can already feel this symbolism, and it is a detail I particularly love when games manage to hide. My only caveat, and here I speak solely based on what I have seen so far, is that the demo delivers the atmosphere and emotional tone very well, but still does not show enough for me to know if the narrative will sustain a good pace throughout the whole game. It's easy to sell a journey of grief and overcoming in a short preview. The real challenge is keeping this emotional weight working during hours of exploration and combat without becoming repetitive or cheesy. Anyway, what has already been released made me quite optimistic regarding the story. Duskfade seems to have the ambition to tell something genuine behind the nostalgic 3D platformer aesthetic inspired by Kingdom Hearts and Jak and Daxter. If Weird Beluga manages to maintain this emotional depth from start to finish without losing its grip, it could be one of the most surprising games of the year in terms of narrative, even coming from a genre that normally prioritizes gameplay over story. My impression of the gameplay, playing only the demo, is that it has a very strong 3D action identity with the feel of a modernized classic game. What got me the most was the movement rhythm. Running, jumping, sliding, and chaining navigation feels like the soul of the game, and this already makes you want to keep moving forward just for the pleasure of moving through the scenery. The platforming gave me a very pleasant feeling of fluidity, mainly because it does not seem to want to trap you in excessively complex mechanics right off the bat. The demo sells this idea of momentum, jumping, and fast displacement well, and this matches a game that wants to keep you moving at all times. In combat, I felt that Duskfade is still showing more potential than depth, but this is not a flaw for a demo. Light and heavy attacks work, basic combos exist, and special strikes start to add an extra layer of variety, yet you can still see that the game is holding back quite a bit for later. What I liked is that combat does not try to just look pretty, it wants to have impact. The idea of mixing platforming with more direct fights creates a flow that combines well with the overall proposal, and transforming the advance into a sort of rhythm reward works better than I expected. On the other hand, I still feel that the demo does not deliver much clarity on how much the system will truly grow. Even seeing new powers like Blast and Hook being publicized, the current feeling is of a kit that is still quite lean, so my opinion falls midway between enthusiasm and caution. I thought Duskfade already has a very promising gameplay base, fast movement, pleasant platforming, and combat with personality. It is not yet that kind of demo that makes me say, now everything is fully defined, but it is exactly the kind of game that makes me want to see if the final version will manage to turn this good first impression into something truly striking. I think Duskfade has a very beautiful art direction and is quite secure in what it wants to convey. It is not that kind of game that tries to impress you only with raw fidelity. It draws attention more through visual identity, color palette, and the way each scenery seems designed to transmit fantasy and magic. From what has been shown, the game has a look that talks quite a bit with this classic 3D adventure vibe, but with a modern, clean, and well-polished finish. This gives the feeling that it is aiming for a very smart middle ground between nostalgia and current presentation. In the demo, I felt that the environments already have a good capacity to build climate. Even without needing to exaggerate realism, the sceneries convey a feeling of a living world, with shapes, light, and composition that greatly help sell this fantasy of clocks, time, and mystery. And this is important because in a game like this, visuals need to invite you to keep walking just to see what comes next. I also really like the way colors seem to work in favor of game legibility. From what has been released and what appears in the demo impressions, Duskfade bets on more enchanting tones and contrasts that highlight characters, enemies, and scenery well. To me, this already shows that the game understands that pretty graphics are not just textures, but visual clarity too. Now, speaking more personally, I think the game has that look that makes me think, okay, this could really become striking if the rest stays aligned. I saw nothing that feels generic or personalityless, and that already weighs heavily in its favor. Even in a genre with many games trying to reclaim this type of fantasy, Duskfade manages to stand out through how it presents itself. At the same time, I would say its charm lies more in art than in any attempt at absurd technical impact. And honestly, that is a positive point for me, because the aesthetic feels well thought out for the type of experience it wants to deliver. When a game nails this, it does not depend only on resolution or pretty effects, it creates presence. My impression of Duskfade's graphics is quite positive. It conveys a feeling of a game made with visual care, plenty of personality, and an identity that already works even before the final launch. From the demo and what the developer has shown so far, I would say it is a game that is not trying to be the most realistic, but rather the most beautiful within its own proposal, and that, to me, is already half the battle. Through the demo, Duskfade seems to be in a very playable phase, but not yet fully polished on the performance side. It does not give me the feeling of a broken game. It gives me more the idea of a project that already runs, but is still asking for fine-tuning before launch. The demo appears to maintain a 60 FPS target in a good portion of tests, including on more modest machines and even on the Steam Deck, at least in the most positive reports. This gives me a good feeling because it shows the technical foundation is neither absurd nor ill-conceived. For a stylish 3D game like this, achieving reasonable stability in a demo is already an encouraging sign. At the same time, I would not say performance is flawless. I experience drops above 60 FPS with frame time stutter, mainly when resolution goes up or when hardware is more demanding, and this is exactly the kind of thing that bothers more than a dry FPS number. In practice, the game might even look like it runs well, but still deliver that rough feeling that denounces a lack of optimization. The detail that weighs most against it for me is the absence of modern adjustment tools like DLSS or FSR cited in demo tests. When a game still depends too much on the player manually tinkering with resolution to achieve fluidity, I feel that performance is functional but not comfortable. And honestly, for a current PC game, I expect a bit more refinement than that. On the positive side, the most recent reports about the demo speak of solid 60 FPS stability and reasonable load times with no serious bugs during the tested period. This makes me think the developer at least already has a consistent technical base. So it does not look like a need to start everything over case, but rather polishing on top of what already exists. I also think it is important to state that the community's overall impression of the demo is quite positive, which helps reinforce that performance issues are not destroying the experience. Still, positive demo praise does not erase details like stutter, missing upscaling, and occasional drops in heavier sceneries. To me, this places the game at an intermediate point, promising, playable, and still asking for optimization. I felt that Duskfade does not give me performance fear, but it doesn't give me total confidence yet either. The demo suggests a game that already works well enough to catch attention, but still needs a good round of refinement to deliver a smoother experience that is less hardware dependent. I would say Duskfade has a much higher chance of being worth buying at launch than disappointing, especially if you like this type of 3D platformer with action and polished visuals. From the demo and what the developer has shown so far, it conveys that impression of a game that already has a very good foundation and can surprise more through the whole package than through a single isolated element. What catches my attention most is that it does not look like a generic project trying to copy empty nostalgia. It has visual personality, a striking world, and a proposal that mixes platforming, combat, and fantasy in a way that catches attention right away. And honestly, when a game already enters with its own identity, that weighs heavily in its favor at launch. In the demo, what I felt was more of a game with evident potential than an insecure game. Of course, you can still notice points that can improve, mainly in general refinement, but the main structure already looks fun, with a good movement base and a presentation that greatly helps sell the experience. To me, this places Duskfade in a better position than many games that arrive with zero soul. I also think it is important to say that this is the kind of game that makes the most sense for those who like light adventure, 3D platforming, and accessible combat, but with charm. If you enjoy games that win you over through atmosphere, art direction, and the feeling of entering a well-built world, Duskfade seems to fit very well. It does not look like a game made just to impress in a trailer. It feels like a project that genuinely wants to work in practice. Now, being fair, I would not buy it expecting a genre revolutionary. What it seems to offer is something more interesting. A solid, stylish experience with plenty of appeal for those who like this kind of game. And honestly, that is already enough for me to look at the launch with plenty of interest. So my reading is this. If you like the genre, I would tend to buy it at launch. Not because it looks perfect, but because it has already shown enough to inspire confidence. And this type of game usually shines precisely when it unites a strong visual identity with pleasant gameplay. Sometimes the best sign is not a game looking flawless, but looking genuinely promising. In the end, I would put Duskfade more in the optimistic purchase category than cautious waiting. It looks like a game that can easily deliver a very good experience right at launch, especially for those who value atmosphere, style, and an action-adventure with plenty of personality.